beads are a great way to add some texture and some sparkle to your embroidery. So in this video I'm going to show you how to put them into your embroidery stitches. So you can put beads down singly, and if you want to know how to do that, we've got a couple of videos on that in this series. We'll put a link to that in the playlist at the end of this video. But in this video we're just going to look at them with embroidery stitches, and I'll show you what they look like. So we're going to do these ones here up to this point here. So just different ways to incorporate different kinds of beads into your stitches. We'll look at these nice pretty decorative ones in another video. We're just going to concentrate on these for now. So these are the beads that I'm going to use today. I've got some seed beads, that's these ones here, 3 different colours and gold, and I've got some bugle beads as well that I'm going to use. If you want to know all about the beads and bead sizes and what thread to use, we have a video on that too. We have a little introduction to bead embroidery, and again that's in the playlist at the end of this video. Okay, let's get going with stitch number 1. So nice simple stitch to start with this one. Just going to do a running stitch, and I'm using this Lana thread. It's Madeira Lana, it's part wool, part acrylic. If you're using a stranded cotton, you could use 2 strands, that would be a good equivalent. So I'm just going to bring it up at the bottom of my line, and I'm going to put on my first bead. So this is a gold seed bead. Thread it onto the needle. Take it all the way to the bottom, lay the thread in the direction you want to stitch, and take your needle back down at the end. Now it's nice that these become part of the stitches rather than just stitching it down on its own. So I've left more thread than there is bead, if you see what I mean. So the stitch is longer than I need to be for the bead, so I can see some of the stitch and some of the bead as well. I'm just going to work up the line, thread the bead on, take the needle down just a little bit past the end of the bead. That's all there is to this one, so I shall just go to the top. Just make sure you position your bead before you take your stitch, so you know how far along you need to take your needle back down. So it's just a straight stitch with a bead on. Take the bead all the way to the end of the thread, so you know how long to make your stitch. Leave a little gap between each stitch, that's the running stitch. I'll just get one more on the end there. Now that's the simplest form of adding beads onto your running stitch, but I'll do another one. I'm going to come back down this time because you can add more than one bead on. So let's put a gold seed bead on, then we'll put a nice purple one on, these lovely purple ones, and then we'll put another gold. So you can do any combination you like for this, but I just want to show you what it looks like, just leaving a bit of the thread showing because that's all part of it. I'm using an embroidery thread, so I want to see that thread. So there's one stitch, leave a gap like so. We could just put 3 gold ones on, any combination you like. You can have a bit of fun working it out, and this means that you've got so many different patterns that you can do as well. So even if you've only got 3 different kinds of bead, you can have lots of different combinations on. Let's show you what the long beads look like. So these are bugle beads, so they're like seed beads but longer, they're just cut longer. You can thread all 3 on at once if you like, you don't have to do them individually. Let's do different combo, 2 of them. You can really put as many on as your needle is long, but they will get a little bit wieldy by that point. They might start moving around, so don't make them too long, but lots of different combinations that you can add onto this stitch. And I've got room, just put a normal one on the end. I think we'll just go for a gold one and a blue one. Just put 2 on that last one. So just some different ways that you can incorporate beads into your really simple running stitch. So if you want just a row of beads in your stitch, you don't want to get too complicated yet, but you don't want the gaps like we have for the running stitch, we can do a back stitch. So we come up ahead of ourselves. I'm going to put on one of these, I think. Just going to put 1 stitch on to show you. So it looks initially like the running stitch, but we've come back on ourselves. So now we come up ahead. Going to alternate the colours just for a bit of variety. Thread on the bead down to the bottom of the thread, and you're going back stitch, so we're coming forward and coming back on ourselves, so back into the end of that previous stitch. And now we join our row of stitching up, so we have a solid line now. So it's a nice simple stitch still. Again, making my stitch just a bit longer than the bead is so that you can see the embroidery thread as well as the bead. I'm just going to work my way all the way up the line like this. So you come up ahead of yourself, thread the bead on, needle goes back down at the end of the previous stitch. That's all there is to it. So if you wanted fewer beads but more thread showing, you could do every other bead in the row. So you could just put a back stitch in like so, and then on the next back stitch you could put the bead on. So if you need a little bit more thread showing and a little bit less bead, you could do that. That's quite nice. So last couple here. Let's leave one out and put one in on the end. Let's put a green one in. So again, any combination you like, have a little bit of play, leave some of the beads out, and gives you a completely different effect. Okay, so that's a single row. What you can do with back stitch is you can build up your rows and make more of a solid shape. So I'll show you how to do that now. So I've started another colour thread. I'm going to use some different beads as well. And I'm going to work another row of back stitch, but I'm going to work the beads in between the beads on the previous row. So I'm going to bring my needle up now next to that bead there, that second one, and you'll see what happens. I'm going to use a purple bead this time. Thread the bead on. We're doing back stitch, so I'm still coming back, and that needle goes down next to that first bead, and now the purple bead just nestles in between those two beads. They sort of cross over like a brick pattern. So the needle comes up next to the next bead. I'm going to keep these all the same colour this time. Back stitch, so it goes back into the end of the previous stitch, and that bead just nestles between. So really nice if you wanted to do a filling and you wanted to change colours. You could shade your bead, you can shade your threads, so many combinations, but it does make a really nice block of beaded stitching. So we'll do a couple more so you can see how that looks. So you can go quite close to that previous row as well, so that the stitches, then the beads nestle nice and closely next to each other. So I'll work my way up to the end and then I'll show you what it looks like at the end. Now we've got to the bit on the row where I actually left a bead out and I've just got the stitch. So you could either put a bead in there anyway, or you could leave that out too if you want a gap. Or you could try a bugle bead in the middle. You'll have to just check that that fits okay before you do it, because they are different lengths. But again, just experiment and try a few different things and see what effect you can get. put another one in here because we left another stitch out. So that fits nicely in there. So a second row of back stitch in there, and you can just keep going with this, and you can shade as you come out and just make a really nice big block of colour. So just keep going with that stitch and see what you can do with it. So this one's a slightly more complicated stitch. If you want to have a go at these stitches before you try them with beads, we've got videos on all of these in our stitch library, so check those out first, practice without the beads, and then you'll be more confident to put the beads on. So I've doubled my thread for this one so we can see a little bit more of the thread, and I've just come up at the end of where I want to do my row stitching. I'm going to thread a bead on, and that goes all the way to the end. So we're going to make a knot at the end of that bead there, so the thread lies in the direction that I'm stitching in. It makes a loop around to the left, that's quite important. So hold that tight, and the needle goes down to the right of that thread past the bead. So just make sure you've gone past the bead and take the needle through. Don't pull it all the way through, because we're going to come up to the left of that thread, and that's inside that loop. And we can just pull that tight, and there's a knot. So that's the knot of the coral stitch. So put on your next bead, that's one stitch, so when I'm working the second stitch, so bead goes on in position, thread in the direction that you want to stitch in, needle goes down to the right, comes back up to the left inside the loop, pull the thread tight. So it does take a little bit of practice, this one. Thread the bead on, thread in the direction you're going, needle to the right, back up to the left, inside the loop, pull it tight. It's important to put that bead in position first. I think that makes all the difference, so you're not fighting with the bead. So I'm going to work my way all the way to the top in coral stitch. I've got my last bead on there, and it ends with a knot, and then just to finish that off, all you need to do is to take your needle down a little bit further past that last knot and just finish it off on the back, and then you get a row of knots and a row of beads, which looks really pretty, and that's coral stitch. So the next stitch is a good one to use if you want to do a chain stitch and you want to put beads on. Now beads don't go on a normal chain stitch very well because they move around and you kind of get a bead on each side of the chain. So this is the one to use if you like the chain stitch. So again, I've doubled my thread so I can see more of the thread. I'm going to come up and back down at the end of the line, and that will make my first chain. So this is like a normal chain stitch, this part, and the bead goes on in between. So I'm going to come up there, tension in the direction I'm going. There's my first chain. Now this is the cable bit, so now we're going to thread a bead on. Now take the bead to the bottom, and then the needle goes from left to right underneath the thread. So you sort of hook up that thread like so, and it just wraps around once. I'll do this again, so don't worry. And then the needle goes back in at the end of the bead. You can see I'm keeping the tension on this tight so it doesn't come undone. Needle goes through to the back. Now don't pull it all the way through, because that is going to make the next chain. So that's important. If you pull it through, you've lost your chain. So back up in the middle to make the chain stitch. Thread on your bead. Slide the bead to the bottom of the thread. Keep the thread taut in the direction you're going. Scoop the needle underneath, so it's on the left of the thread, goes underneath the thread, wrap it round once, and then the needle goes back into the fabric at the end of the bead. Keep the tension on this thread here. Don't pull it all the way through, you'll lose your chain, I'm about to do. Don't follow my own advice there. So there's my chain, so back up to form the next chain stitch. So each one is attached to the next one, so don't forget that, like I nearly just did. Thread on the bead, to the bottom, scoop underneath, thread goes round once, needle goes back in at the end of the bead, form your next chain. So really pretty one this. Just make sure you form the next stitch. So bead on, thread goes around the needle once, back into the fabric, ready for the next chain. So get one more chain and one more bead on. So there's my chain, got a green bead there. Wrap the thread once, needle goes in. And if you wanted to change your thread part way through, if you'd run out and to finish off at the end, got your chain stitch there, just come back up in the middle of the chain and stitch over the end of it, and that will just finish off that thread, and you can come back up inside the chain to start your next stitch, and then that's how you finish it. So that is a cable chain with beads. Now this one I'm going to start from the other end and work towards me. It's much easier, and you'll see that as I work the stitch. And this doesn't start on the line, this starts just to the left. I'm going to make a little Y shape, so up and down either side of the line, making a loop a little bit like if you're doing that chain stitch that we've just done. Come up inside, tension downwards this time, so we've made a sort of an open chain. This is the point where I'm going to put the bead on, so I'll put a purple one, and that goes underneath there, and then the thread goes down at the end. You can choose how long you want to do this, how much thread you want to see, so I should do a little bit less than that, I think. So we make a little Y shape with a bead on it that looks like a fly stitch. And then we're going to come back up on the left underneath that first one where the bead is, so come in line with the bead, and that will give you nice spacing. So up on the left, you can come up on the right and down on the left, it doesn't matter which way, whichever way is easiest. Make the loop. Now we come up at the end of the previous stitch and inside that loop. Let's put a gold one on. Push the bead into position, then take the thread through to the back. Be organised about it so that you're not fighting with your bead. So up on the left, down on the right, make that loop, back up at the end of the previous stitch, inside that loop, tension it in the direction you're going. Let's go for all colours, shall we? Let's go for green one. Right, so let's get a bit creative with it now. So that's just a single bead. You can put on a bugle bead if you want. Now obviously you get a longer stem on this one now. So come up halfway up from the bead, halfway up from the bottom of the bead. You could put 2 beads on. So you get that pretty design of beads down the middle, but the stitches stay fairly consistent, so nice one to have a play with this one. So up at the end of the previous one, however long that happens to be in the centre there. Let's go back to a single. And I'm just going to work to the bottom, try some different combinations, and we'll see what we have when I get there. So we're on the last one, so try and keep these stitches down here all in a row so you've got some consistency in your stitching and have fun with the beads, but try and keep the fly stitch going nice and neat. One bead for the end, down at the end to finish off. So that's a fly stitch with beads, really pretty one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and inspired to try some beads in your embroidery. They do add some really lovely texture and shine to your work. If you've liked it, give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, click the subscribe button, and if you click the little bell, you'll get notifications when we upload something new. And check out our other beading videos and all of our other stitch library as well, and I'll see you next time.